we're going to start by talking with Jeff Carroll. And if I told you everything good there is to tell about Jeff Carroll, we wouldn't have time to talk. He's a professor, he's a writer, he's written 5 books, and he loves Texas. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
You know, Being Texan, this is this wonderful book, and you have my favorite symbol on here, that Texas star, and I love that. You've been writing and talking about Texas for a long time. People know your series, Legendary Texas. How did you begin to do that?
Well, really, it all almost started across the hall here about 20 years ago when I started the Legendary Texas program on KAMU radio. Ran for 500 segments, as I recall, something like that anyway. And I really hadn't planned to do anything with a book, but after the first few months, I began to get letters from teachers who had had this broadcast into their classrooms. And there was one particular teacher that said, "I'm not going to leave you alone until you put some of these stories in a book for me." And so that was the first issue of Legendary Texas, and there were 5 of those. And that has now segued into this Being Texan, because the Legendary Texas series was all about all kinds of things, people, places, things. This is all about people. People that, in my estimation, have demonstrated in some way what it means to be Texan, although some of them never ever came here.
Well, you know, Jeff, the thing that grabbed me in looking at these, and it is a collection of stories about these, but each story, it seemed to me, had an attitude. You personified something about Texas personality in all of these. Did you intend to do that?
Well, that's what I decided was Being Texan. What was that attitude? What is the attitude? You know, the subtitle of this is Celebrating a State of Mind, which is your attitude. And it begins with prehistory and brings it up almost to the present, because throughout our history there have always been people, just ordinary people like you and me, that in some way managed to cope with their situation. If it weren't for that, we wouldn't be here. I could kind of wonder sometimes how my father coped with some of the things that he did. He was the youngest of 14 kids, and I think it was from him I got my storytelling. But if he hadn't been able to cope with that, well, I certainly wouldn't be here.
And of course, your family came to Texas before Texas was a republic.
Yes.
And I share that heritage, so I identify with a lot of what you have to say in this book, but I want people to get a flavor for it. Tell us 1 or 2 of your favorite stories that are in here.
Okay, well, one of the things that I try to do, Sharon, is try to pick out people that you don't expect would be someone who would excel or exceed or do something special. Just ordinary people. One of my favorites, always has been, is about the old retired fisherman, ship's captain from the Northeast, from the New England states. Just gotten too old to go to sea. One of his sons was in Galveston, and so he left the sea and he came to Galveston, but people thought he was too old. He couldn't get a job. He couldn't do anything. Finally, he got a job with the police department, going around at night just shaking doors to make sure that they were locked. And in his spare time, he built a scale model of the fishing boat that he had had off the New England coast. Wasn't quite through with it when the 1900 storm blew in, but she floated off of her chocks, and he kicked down his fence because his house was already in the water. The boat floated, he and his sons. They rescued over 250 people with that little boat before it finally broke up and tied up to the second story of one of the buildings down on the Strand. And so I call that the hobby and the hurricane.
That's a great way to put it.
Because we're a throwaway society. These are people that sometimes we throw away. And yet, without him, well, there would have been a lot of other stories that would never have been told.
Isn't that true? Isn't that a great, great story? And he wasn't a Texan, but he got us here as quick as he could.
That's right. That's right. And I also try to focus on kids, younger people. Today we have some problems with older folks who still have not learned to accept adult responsibility. And so I try to picture some of the younger folks who, at a very young age, did accept adult responsibility and became adults long before they were supposed to. One of my favorites is about a 4-year-old who was a rancher. There's a long story that goes with it, but he sold his first horses as he was 4 years old.
Well, hold that thought.
I'll hold it. I'll hold it.
We don't want to give away the whole book, but we've got on. If this is what is your interest, here's how you can find out and read these stories for yourself. Being Texan is the name of the book. For more information, you can call 979-779-2300 or go to LoneStarPublishing.net, and it's, of course, in local bookstores. Jeff, thanks for sharing your stories.
You're very welcome.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.